Hi, my name's Mike. I'm a filmmaking and digital technologies teacher and executive member of Atom SA. In this online professional development session, I'm going to be discussing Adobe Premiere Pro from a teacher's focus and perspective. This video about Premiere Pro will include how to acquire, understanding the interface, workflow, essential tools, helpful techniques, text and color grading, and the exporting process. Okay, so let's start off with what exactly is Premiere Pro. So Premiere Pro is video editing software. It's industry standard, meaning that if students are learning how to use it now, then they can take that into the professional realm as well with them. And so it's fantastic for them to be learning these types of skills and this type of software because they can build off of it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's very complicated because you can actually get started with the basics, and this video is going to be going over the basics. But the thing is that the app has a lot of depth. So for those students that really can push it, they will have the tools to be able to do that. So I'm here on the Adobe website. You can get information about getting Creative Cloud for Education on the website here. As of February 2022, Adobe has made this a bit more accessible. The pricing's quite reasonable, and you can talk to your IT department at the school if you don't have a Creative Cloud subscription to see what the pricing would look like. Because it's not only Premiere Pro that you get access to, you get access to all of the creative apps that Adobe makes, including things like Photoshop and After Effects. So this is what the Creative Cloud app looks like when it's open. It's a hub for all of the Adobe apps. And it's where you can install them and open them as well, or you can just open them normally. I'm going to go and open Premiere Pro. And when you open Premiere Pro, you get given a window that looks like this. You have your recent projects here, but I'm just going to start a new project. And you normally will get a window that pops up like this. Now this can sometimes throw kids off. It looks like there's lots of different options here. You don't need to worry about any of these. You might just want to change the location to something that suits you, and always good practice to name a project from the get-go, because you don't want 1,000 untitles out there on your computer. So I'm just going to call this one Test 1 and click OK. Right, so now I'm in Premiere Pro in a blank project. This is what it looks like when you open a new one, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the file organization and the essential tools. Now when this opens up, straight away there's all these sorts of things poking out at you, and it can be quite daunting at first, and especially for kids. So the best way to think about it is there's a few tools on here which you can learn very quickly and easily, and the rest of it you can learn at your own pace. So the anatomy of it is we have a timeline down the bottom here in this panel. On the left, we have our media library. So anytime we import something, it lives in here. The timeline is where we chop it up. Up here where it says program, this is just the preview where you can see what you're working on. And here on the left, this is effect controls, but also it's got some other tabs that you can click on. But you're mostly just going to be using effect controls. Another thing to realize is that these change and jump around. So the anatomy of Premiere is you can actually edit your interface to a way that suits you. So I can move these around. I can pop that up there. I can grab this, pop it over here. So that's why it's quite modular looking. Now you can also click on these tabs at the top, and it'll throw you into these different presets. I was in captions and graphics before, but when you open it, you'll probably be in something like assembly or editing, and you can change what these look like as well. So I've just clicked on the editing one, and I'm just moving some of these around. So now I'm ready to bring some clips in. So you can simply drag and drop to bring clips into this project. You can right click here in the project panel and click import. I've got a few clips here that are ready to go. I'm just going to select them and drag them in, and that will import them. You can see they're here in my library. Now something to think about is you want to make sure that these video files, especially for the students, are in a folder that they're not going to move them around or change them. They're happy where the video files are. Because when you move these videos into your project like I have now, you're not actually taking a copy of them and pasting them into the project. You're just linking them to somewhere on the computer. So if you move them wherever they are in the file directory on your computer, then these are going to go missing and they're not going to work. You can relink them. That's something that you can do, but you essentially has to search your computer and find where you've moved them. So just important to think about file organization. Make sure that the clips are in a spot where they're happy to be. So a common mistake with students is they might have an SD card in the computer, then try and drag them from the SD card into the project, and that works fine. But when they take the SD card out, Premiere Pro can't find that footage anymore. Okay, so remember these videos are linked. So I've got them here in my project panel. Over here in my timeline, I can now select one and drag it in. And now you can see that things are really coming to life. So my timeline has two things in it. It's got this video track here, and it's got an audio track underneath it. Now you can see this audio track is actually flatlined because this particular clip doesn't have sound. Okay, but you can have multiple clips on top of each other because there's layers, and the same with sounds. So you can layer up sounds and you can layer up videos as well. So another important thing to note is that by pressing the minus key, you can zoom out. The plus key zooms in, and that's the same for Mac and PC. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and up the top you can see the timestamp. So this particular clip goes for about 18 seconds, and I'm going to bring in this next clip here, and it'll go wherever I drop it. So if I drop it here, it's going to cut in at this point. Okay, and the reason it's going and cutting in is because I've got it over this first one. If I was to drag it on a layer and drag this one on a above layer, it will continue, and then it'll show the clip. Okay, because it's always going to show the top clip in the layering. But I'm going to let them both run out fully. I'm going to keep them on the same layer, layer 1. And we can see this second clip doesn't actually include sound at all, so that's why it hasn't got a sound icon. And then we bring our third one over, which is this extreme close-up, and this also doesn't have sound. So this is what your workstation is going to look like once you've got pictures in it. And you can see up the top here our preview. I can make that bigger or smaller as well, how much space I want it to take up. Something important to know that if I was to drag this one on the same layer over it, it's actually going to cut into and cut that one down. So this first clip has almost disappeared because I've dragged this one over, and if I drag it away, it's gone. But never fear, because I can click on this edge of it and I can pull it out. Now the problem is with this, it's connected to this sound bar here. So because there is actually no sound in this, I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to go unlink. Now the reason I'm doing that is because they're naturally linked, and sometimes you want to delete one without deleting the other. So I want to delete this sound file, so I click on it and press delete, but it deletes the video part of it as well. So if I press Control Z, Command Z to go back. By the way, edit undo is your favorite weapon in this app, so make sure students are using it a lot. What we can do is, this is very handy to learn early on, is right click on one of these of the two and click unlink, and now you can see I can select them independently, which is terrific because I can delete that sound and I can drag this back out to its previous length. So you can drag the beginning and the end of clips out. So let's talk about the basic tools to really get started on this. So the most basics are the razor tool, and the hotkey is C for that. The arrow, which is V, and that's what I was using before. The selection tool is the arrow. And they're probably the main ones that you actually use to get started. And then there's T for type as well. And we'll talk a little bit about text in a moment, but that's where you can find them, here in the toolbar. And remember, you can move these around as well. Maybe I wanted that toolbar to be over there, but I won't. I like it there for now, and I'm going to delete that. Now when I made that text though, before I delete it, you can see it's actually populated it here on this top layer. Again, if I had this video over the text layer, the verticality shows that it's not going to be visible. So you always want whatever's going to be visible on the above layer. Now the way I've been moving this scrubber around, this blue line's called the scrubber, is just by clicking the top part of it, clicking and dragging. If I want to play it normally, all I have to do is press the play button or press spacebar. The students are pretty good at learning the hotkeys if you tell them early on, and it's going to make their workflow a lot smoother. So there's a slow motion drone shot here of this person on the hill, and then you can see where it cuts, and now it's cut to this other slow motion shot in the kitchen. So I think these go too long, so let's shorten them up a little bit. And the way I'm going to do that, I could do it in two ways. I could drag it like that, and that's going to drag it to about halfway from the end, or we can use our razor tool here, and anywhere I can slice it, and now you can see it sliced it and made two clips. So just for the example, I can actually swap those two bits around, and now I've got the second half first and the first half second. It looks awful, so I'm going to delete that part of it. I just clicked on it and pressed delete. You can do that by clicking on individual clips, and you can also click and drag, so I can collect all of these three clips now, and I'm going to drag them and move them to the beginning. So the reason I move them to the beginning is because otherwise the beginning here just has blackness, so you always want to start your video at 0. Some other things with the layer is you can turn the visibility on and off on separate layers, and that can be quite handy. You can also lock them so you don't accidentally delete something. So I might be working on the second layer and I don't want to touch this first layer, which I'm happy with. So if I press the padlock, that means lock the layer, and you can see it's graded out there as well. So that's easy to understand visually. Some other interesting bits are that you can actually drag these things out, so I can make this layer here larger, and that gives me more visual information, so I can see thumbnails of the clips. I can go back to normal, and when you have an audio file, that's great because if I drag it out, it shows more information about the wavelengths, and we'll get to that a little bit later. I think now we should move on to our effects control panel here, because it's got some really great tools for us. So I've got my shot here of the man standing on the hill. You can see I can change the position and the scale of the clip, and to do that, when you hover over, you get this icon, and all that means if you click and drag to the left or click and drag to the right, it's going to change that value. So this is the X value, so the horizontal, and I can move it that way or I can move it that way. Now let's say I wanted it to be maybe a little bit more center frame, our little actor here. So that's great. Only problem is we've got this big black bar. Also, I should say you can move it up and down. So I want that to be the position. Only problem is I've got a little bit of black now, and this is where scale comes in. So using the same principle, I can make it bigger or smaller, the clip. So I'm actually going to bring my clip up like that, and now you can see I've manipulated this shot. So I've actually made this person central in my shot now, whereas originally they weren't. You can even go and reset the parameters here. So that's what it was before, and then if I go Command Z, it goes back to, or Control Z if you're on a PC, it goes back to what I did there. You can also toggle all of the effects on and off by pressing the FX button here. So that was before and after, before and after. So they're the really main tools that you can use for your shots, and it really helps with composition. If the composition's a little bit off, that's a great way to do it. You see I've gone up to about 133% here. You're just going to be careful, because if you go too far up, the resolution is going to definitely suffer. General rule of thumb is I tell my students not to go any further than 150%, and even that is pushing it sometimes, so it's probably a case by case. But if I go 130 on this clip, I certainly feel like we're getting away with it. You can rotate the clip as well, so maybe if the tripod's a little bit off and they need to rotate it a couple of degrees, then they can do that as well by just again click and drag, and there you go, that's 6 degrees in that direction. And then opacity as well, so I can turn the opacity up and down, and I'm doing it this way. The reason you might want to do that is you might have another clip underneath, you might be doing some type of effect, so I've got a clip underneath it now that I've done that in the timeline. And then if I bring the opacity down, on the top clip, I'll select the top clip and bring the opacity down, you can see that that bottom clip's starting to come through. And students might want to do that when they're trying to juxtapose things. So I'm going to undo that now. Oh, another thing is, while I'm here, blend mode has a whole bunch of great presets where if you've got two clips on top of each other, they can do some really interesting things, and it's certainly worth experimenting on what types of things you can do with these blend modes. So that's the darken one. Multiply essentially gets rid of all white. Overlay, and they all have their own different type of effect as well. I'm going to change this now back to normal, and I'm going to move this clip back to where I had it before and keep them on the same line here. But they're probably the most important things, and this is all the basic effect controls. Now the way effect controls work is you can actually add more effects as well, and this is where it can get really fun, and students can go quite far with it. But I'll just show you a couple to start with. So when I'm showing students Premiere Pro for the first time and they want to know what some effects are, I show them a few that are probably going to be the most handy getting started. And the way you find your effects is you click here where it says effects, and you search for them. Or otherwise you can go one by one and open up these different types of things. But one that I like to show students is horizontal flip. Here it is, so I just start typing in it. And if I drag it, so the way it works is you drag it onto the clip you want to apply it to. So I've just held it down and dragged it until I get the plus little icon with the fist. Boom. And that's flipped that shot around. You want to be careful. I mean, that looks great in this shot, but you want to be careful in shots where maybe there's text and you don't want to have backwards text. And then you can see it actually appears here in my effect controls. So my horizontal flip, I've put it on this clip here and it's popped up. And I can toggle it on and off like this. And if I want to get rid of it, I can just click on it here and delete it, and that effect has now gone. And you can stack effects as well. So let me reapply the horizontal flip here. And another one I'm going to chuck in is a blur. Gaussian blur is just a good standard one. I'm going to throw that on. And then it's going to give me the parameters. So here's blurriness. If I click and drag it this way, you can get blurrier and blurrier. And sometimes students like to play around with that effect as well. And it definitely can have its purpose. So I'm going to delete that one now. One effect that's worth knowing from the get-go is what's called the warp stabilizer. And this can help with those shaky clips, and you just want to take a bit of shaky out of them. It can't work miracles, but it can give a very shaky clip or a slightly shaky clip. It can help just bring it back a little bit. So if I look at my three clips here, these ones are all pretty steady, but this one here has got a little bit of wobble to it. So we can chuck our warp stabilizer on this, I think, and see if it helps us out. So I'm going to start typing in warp, and here it is, and I'm going to drag it on to our close-up here. Now the first thing it does is it says analyzing, so you just got to give it some time to analyze the clip, and it gives you a status update here, so it does it frame by frame. It says, okay, it's going to just take a minute to do that. But while it's doing that, I just might talk about some of these options here. So essentially you can choose what you want the result to be. So you want to keep this on smooth motion. This, I'd not recommend going any higher than 5%. Any higher than 5%, and I know that sounds strange, but any higher than that, you tend to get some artifacts and you can see that something strange is going on. You get some of these, this warpy sort of look, when really you're just trying to reduce the wobble. Method, you can experiment with these. I sometimes will go between position, scale, and rotation and subspace. Let's try position, scale, and rotation for this one. It's just worth experimenting. And then I'd also auto scale as well, because sometimes what's going to generally happen is it's going to need to crop in a little bit in order to be able to achieve this. Alright, so that warp stabilizer has finished now, and we can press spacebar just to run this back and see how it looks. And you see it's going a bit laggy, but it definitely has reduced some of the shake out of it. So you just play with those until you're happy. It's a bit harder to tell with slow motion, but I can see that stabilizer is doing its thing. You might have noticed that there's a bit of red here now above. Now whenever the computer needs to do something that sort of needs an extra bit of grunt, it might put red indication in the timeline. That's just saying, look, it needs to use a bit of extra power to do this. So when you're trying to play it back in the editing, it might be a little bit slow. That's not going to translate to when it renders, when you export it. That's going to look fine. It's just that it's going to maybe stutter a little bit when you're trying to play it back in real time when you're editing it. Another way to tackle that, though, if you've got students or a computer and it's struggling with a project, especially when these projects get really large, you can change this over here. Now this fraction is saying how much of the final percentage of the resolution do you want it to be. Now you just got to remember that this is only in the preview of when you're editing it. So this isn't going to change your final rendered video when it's published. It's just the resolution of playing it back during this. Now you can see it's gone a little bit blurry here, and it doesn't have the same crispness that it did earlier. That's because I've changed it to 1/8 of the original quality. Okay, and I actually recommend at least always having it at 1/4. You don't need it any higher than that when you're editing, and you don't want your editing to crawl to a stop, and that can be really frustrating, especially for the kids. But if I change this to 1/8 now, especially over this red zone here, it hasn't stopped, the scrubber hasn't stopped. It's starting to slow down a little bit, but if I try again, when I've got it on full, okay, and I press spacebar here, you can see that this is really starting to suffer. It's almost pause 100%. So I'm going to bring that back down to 1/8, and that's the reason why you want to have this playback resolution slowed down. Another thing is sometimes you just need to stop it and start it, and it'll kick in. Alright, so I'm just going to talk a little bit more about audio now. So I might actually just delete this warp stabilizer so it doesn't upset the project too much, because it can be quite a heavy thing to do. I'm going to open up a folder and bring on some music here. Alright, so you can see I've dragged and dropped some music. Let's have a listen by pressing space. That's great, very inspirational. But just visually, you can see that I've only got 3 clips here, and this audio is going on for ages. Now, a classic mistake for kids is they might use music in their thing, but then they might only have a clip that, you know, their film actually finishes here. And when they render it, it's just a black screen until that finishes. Because when you render, it goes for every clip that you've got on your timeline. So let's bring that back. And again, there's 2 ways I could reduce this. I could go to the end, hover over it, click and drag and bring that all the way in, or I think let's use our razor tool that we've learned about, and let's just snip it. Now you can see it's actually a black line comes up. So if I press plus to zoom in here, it has a little magnetic snap, so it sort of predicts where you want to do it. So it can tell, okay, it's trying to go close to the end here, so it's snapping me to the end of that clip, which is really handy. So I've cut it, there's a line, I can now press V, and remember V is what gets the selection tool. I can select this one, and I can delete that now. So now the sound only goes as long as the clips go for. That winked. Okay, now the way that we add effects to sound is exactly the same as the way that we did it to our video clips. I would you might have just seen there that it auto-saved my work, which is really handy. What I'm going to do though with my sound, I'm going to bring this down here. So the way I did that is I clicked on the sort of bottom line of this layer and I dragged it. Now you can see that the audio wave is bigger, and there's 2 of them. L for left and R for right, so it's showing us that this is the left channel, this is the right channel. So one sound is going to come through the left speaker and the other one through the right speaker. This is the volume level, so I can really bring that high or bring that nice and low. So that's very quiet. If I bring it up, quite loud. On the right here, you can see our audio indicators. You don't want these peaking out at red, because that means it's going to be far too loud. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to bring that right up. I'm going to go to about here. And you can see that that red was really getting peaking. And the last thing you want is a student to render that out and you're trying to show it to people and it sounds awful and blasting speakers. So if I bring that down, you can see it's still going too high. I'm going to bring that down again. And I think that's quite good. So just tickling between 0 and -6 decibels is the way to go there. You can also have it go up and down in spaces. Okay, so if I hold down Command on the Mac or Alt on a PC, and I hover over the line, you can see my mouse has changed. I'm just toggling on and off. You can see it changes to having a plus icon. If I click anywhere on the timeline, that's created a keyframe. So I've created one there. If I select a second one, it's created two, and I can select them. They go blue by clicking on them. Watch what happens when I bring this second one, I drag it down. So you can see there, that's faded it down. And then I can make another two, and I can fade it back up and even get really loud. So this is a great way to have that extra control over sound, which is really important in films with not just music tracks like this, but sound effects also. Now, you don't have to manually fiddle around with the sound waves like this. You can just use simple effects like we did with the video clips. So if I come back over here, I'm going to type in fade. And if we go down here to crossfade, you've got one called constant gain. If I click and drag that, I can hover over the beginning of the clip and pop it there. And now if I play back from the beginning, you can see that fades in. And I can chuck one at the end as well, and that will fade out. Okay, and you can even click and drag and say I want that fade out to be longer. And you can see it's fading out, taking a longer time. So there's more than one way to do things in Premiere, and I can select it and delete it, and I say actually no, I want to create my own fade out here, and I could do it like that instead. Keyframes like this actually allow us to do some quite sophisticated things in Premiere Pro, and so we can actually animate keyframes. Now this sounds very tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's quite simple. So let's look at the text tool again here, and I'm going to put some text in this first clip, but I want that text to move. So we can use animating keyframes to do that. So I'm going to click on the T for the type tool here, and I think this is some nice negative space to put my title in, and I'm going to call it Epic Title. Okay, now we want that to be bigger, so I can select it, and we can change scale, and we can do things in our effect control here, but it's actually probably better for us to use another window for our text, because we can go to Window and Essential Graphics, and this is actually in the Edit tool here going to allow us to do lots of great things. It actually lets you do things like snap things vertically perfectly and horizontally perfectly, although I don't want that, but that's really great when you want things to be in the right spot. You can see I can rotate it there as well. That was actually an accident. I'm going to pop it back up here. I'm going to change the font size. I'm going to make that a lot bigger because this is going to be an epic title, so it needs large scale. Obviously white isn't contrasting very well, so I can change the fill here. I can change that to black. You can even give it a stroke. So if I click here, I can give it a big white stroke, and that gives it that outline. You can choose lots of different fonts. So I'm going to choose one that's quite big and bold, Ultra. I think that's apt. Now it's too big for the screen, so I'm going to get my font size and bring that back down again. Epic Title. And I'm going to move it about here. So there's the title. You can see it's put it here. If I press space, bring the resolution up a little bit. You can see it disappears, so I can just drag that out so it goes for the whole clip. Now that's pretty epic, but I think we should use some keyframes to make it even better. So again, we've already learned how we can position things and scale things and rotate things in the effects control. But there's a little time watch icon here, and it says toggle animation when I hover over it. And the way it works is there's a mini version of this timeline up here in effect controls you might have seen. I'm at the beginning of it now. If I press, let's use the scale. If I click toggle animation on the scale, it's created a keyframe here at the beginning of the clip. If I now move towards the end of the clip and I press this button here to add another keyframe, you can see I've got two keyframes. And on this version, on this keyframe, I'm actually going to make this larger scale. I'm going to drag it to about that size. Now it's gone off of the screen here, but watch what happens when I press space. The scale is going up and it's getting larger here in the preview. So we can also stack this. So my position is going bad, it's going off screen. So why don't we do the same thing with position? I click toggle animation at the beginning of the timeline. And when I get to here, I'm going to drag it back onto the screen. So now it's actually moving left at the same time as getting larger. So there you can see, I've animated my text. And it's gotten larger. And it's not just text you can do that for, you can do it for a clip. So I can, again, get this clip here, and I select scale, and move that keyframe to the beginning, get towards the end, second keyframe, drag this up, and now, if I go to the beginning, it's created a fake zoom in. So you can animate the effects, which really adds a great layer of complexity to it, and you're going to have some students that are going to be able to play with this and come away with some terrific results. Something else that's worth noting that you can do in Premiere Pro is play with the colors and do color grading. So the way that we achieve that is, there's different ways. You could click color up here and it's going to come up with the color tools. Otherwise you can go back to editing where I was, and you can search for Lumetri color here in effects. It's called Lumetri color. Here it is. And you can drag that onto the clip that you want to color grade, and it's going to give you tools here that you can change. So for example, temperature, you can make it much warmer, much colder. I'm actually going to delete that, and let's use the color panel instead. So I've selected a clip, and maybe this is a horror film, and I don't want it to be so vibrant and colorful here. So I could really change the emotional tone of this shot. You know, it's got a knife, maybe we could make it a bit darker. So right now it's quite wholesome. I'm going to bring this temperature down and just bring a bit of blue and colder temperature into the room. There's tint, which is your greens and your pinks. There's a little bit on the green side, I think. Exposure, so I can just make it a bit darker. Contrast, you can bring the blacks and whites further together or closer apart, or vice versa. I'm going to bring the contrast, let's play with it like that for a bit. Let's just bring some of these shadows, let's get the shadows up, I think. Blacks, yep. Saturation, so let's start to suck the color out of this altogether. I'll bring it down to about there. That's great. So now if I play that back, this isn't such a happy scene as it looked before, due a lot to the colorization that I've put into it. And there's more that you can do as well. I'm only in basic correction. I can move over to creative. Now there's a whole bunch of presets you can choose from as well here that I can click on. So if you click on any of these, you can see that it changes the look. This one's monochrome. So you might have students that actually like, these are called LUTs or lookup tables, and there's a whole bunch here. You can download some from the internet and have them, and then people sometimes find the ones that they really enjoy. And there's other things here that you can play around with. I don't want to spend too much time on it. You should look at it in your own time, but you can change the shadows. So the shadows are more orange, and maybe the highlights are more on the yellowy orange side of things. And then you can also toggle it on and off. So if I tick there, you can see that's me turning the creative on and off. But if I go back completely to what it used to look like, this is the original image, and then here's after I've color graded it. You can see it's the tonal shift is quite strong. Now you don't want students pushing things too far because it can really degrade the image. So for example, if I bring saturation up too much, if I turn this one off, yeah, so we've got the Simpsons starting to look here and all those types of things. It can get quite strange So you can see here the quality is completely deep fried at this stage. But color grading and understanding color psychology is an important part of filmmaking, and this can all be done within the same package within Premiere Pro, and it's quite sophisticated, and there's more plugins that you can get for that. Alright, so we've completed our masterpiece here and we're ready to export it. So we can show it to people, maybe we'll upload it to YouTube and types of things like that. So first of all, I'm just going to zoom out and have a look here. Before you export, you want to watch the whole thing through again, make sure there's no mistakes, and you want to make sure you don't have any random clips further up the timeline here. That's going to make your video too long, because what would happen if there was one hiding up here and I've rendered it or exported it, then it would go black for this entire time, and then this would pop up at the end. So I've had a look at here now. Now remember, when I zoom in and out like this, I'm pressing minus and plus. Really handy. I'm going to remove some of this color grading here because I don't think that's working for us. That's better. We've got our epic title, we've got our music, we've got some music effects happening, getting quieter, getting louder, and then fading out at the end. So something to remember is that when you go to export, you need to have this panel here, your timeline, selected. Now when you click on a different panel, you see that it has a blue outline. So just make sure that the panel that you have selected when you're going to export is the timeline. Now all you need to do is press Command M if you're on a Mac, or Control M if you're on PC, M for media, or you can also just go File, Export Media. Okay, so I'm pressing that now, and we come up with the export settings window. Again, lots of tools here, lots of options. It can be quite daunting, but I'm going to tell you the best settings to use very quickly. So for format, we want that to be, here it is, H.264, not Blu-ray, just H.264. That's going to create an MP4, which is a great video file type that lots of different machines can easily use. And then normally I would have the preset as match source high bitrate. That's going to get you the best quality. However, if you're doing something that's very long, the file size might be too big, and you might want to bring that down to medium bitrate. So I'm going to keep it as high bitrate. You can see the estimated file size down the bottom. Now you shouldn't have students making videos that are larger, around a gigabyte. Really, most files, videos, 3-minute, 4-minute videos, they should be about 100 megabytes per minute. You can see that this is about 34 seconds long, 44 megabytes. So if it's over a gigabyte, have a look at some of these settings and maybe bring them down. Now, because I've got it on match source, it's going to just work out all of these video settings here for me. However, you can also go, well, I want to make sure that it is 1080, so you might change it to high quality 1080, and you know that it's going to do 1920 by 1080 quality here. Ticking use maximum render quality, not a bad idea sometimes, especially on smaller videos. You want to make sure that export video and export audio and video, are both selected, because you're going to want both of those. But yes, I'm going to change mine to match source high bitrate. 99% of the videos I export are these exact settings that you're looking at right now. Okay. Now the only other thing you really need to worry about is, I would have that ticked, is saving it with a proper file name in a place that you're not going to lose it, because people often just rush off and they press export and they don't know what they called it and they don't know where it's gone. So you got to click on this blue writing here, and this is where you got to give it a name. I'm going to call mine test1 video, and where, okay, it's saving on the desktop. So when I hit save and when I press export, I know what it's called and I know where it is. So if I press export now, it's going to export it, gives you an estimated time, and it purrs away, and when it's finished you can go to that location where you've saved it and you can watch your video in its final form. And that's essentially the starter's guide to how to use Adobe Premiere Pro. Everything I've showed you here is going to put your students in a good position to be able to edit their films, and I wish you all the best with it.